Good afternoon, class. My name is Arthur Burton. I decided to go with the plaintiff in this case. The reason I ruled for the plaintiff is because the plaintiff did not give written permission to Ashford Hospital to release any medical records to the plaintiff's supervisor. The defendant wants us to believe that because the plaintiff was an employee at the Ashford Hospital, that that some way changed what the law actually says. Now, according to HIPAA, and that stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, they're the ones that are responsible for providing data privacy and safeguarding the information for patients, irregardless of whether that patient is an employee of the hospital or even the director of the hospital, doesn't change the fact that the HIPAA privacy rule is in effect for all. The privacy rule, the HIPAA privacy rule, is set in place so that it can protect the patient's medical information from being given to a supervisor, given to the public. So it kind of keeps your medical issues private to you. And the HIPAA privacy rule, it can't really be shared unless there is a patient's written consent stating that I will allow this amount of information to be given to the general public, to my supervisor, to my family, to anyone that's not involved within the treatment for the medical issues. HIPAA also states that no patient information is to be shared with anyone besides the operating room team or anyone that's involved in the treatment of the patient. So, by Ashford Hospital releasing this information to the patient's supervisor is in violation of the HIPAA Act. And I wanted to say that in these laws and rules, it's irrelevant of whether the person works for the hospital or whether the person knows that they're right. It doesn't say that in the HIPAA Privacy Act. It said there must be written consent from the patient in order for their medical issues or their medical treatment or anything regarding their medical information that is deemed private to be given to anyone unless that patient consents. Now, as far as other laws, there are the Privacy Act of 1974, and it's amended at 5 USC Section 522A, states that hospitals are responsible for protecting patients' information. Anything like first name, last name, social security number, all of these are personal identifiers, which is supposed to be protected by the hospital. And I deem that Ashford Hospital violated that act because they knowingly and willingly gave an administrative supervisor this person's name, social security number, and medical treatment. This should never have happened. And also, furthermore, the FOI, which is the Freedom of Information Act, it also says the same thing, that patient information cannot be shared without written consent. And if we look at the HHS Privacy Act regulation, Title 45 of the Public Welfare and Federal Code, Part B, Section 9, it clearly states that any HHS facility is not to disclose any patient information without the patient's written consent. Therefore, in viewing of all of these facts, irregardless that the Ashford Hospital states that because the person was an employee, that they should have in some way known that they were supposed to give a written consent, is not factual. According to the facts and the laws that we're looking at, it clearly states written consent from the patient. So the defendant is actually trying to lead us into believing that even our own patient information can be disclosed unless we give them written consent. And also, hospitals have a social and moral responsibility. What they are supposed to do is actually explain these rights to the patient. And even if the law was in reverse and it did give the defendant information and says, okay, you can give everybody this information out, the hospital has a duty of care to the patient, and this duty of care is violated. Therefore, I'm going with the plaintiff. And since Ashford Hospital decided that they were going to release this information to a supervisor, whether it was erroneously, whether they thought that in some way that the supervisor was responsible for medical treatment, which I don't know how they would, since an administrative person has no surgical skills and has no MD certifications or any education as a doctor, I don't see how that could be possible. But even if it was a mistake, it still doesn't change the law. The law is written to protect us. The law is written to ensure that our privacy is not in any way leaked to anybody. Now, I also wanted to add one thing. In the case of Lawrence and Berkeley Labs, that a lot of times this information is leaked out to our employers and it's used for genetic monitoring. And genetic monitoring is bad because what will happen is I now know that this person's pregnant. If a person has sickle cell, I can make an assumption that the person is African American. It allows biasness to happen between the employer and the employee, irregardless, because certain personal identifiers and certain diseases are subjected to certain races and cultures. And this opens the door for prejudice. And in review of all that, I definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, can say that I believe that the plaintiff should win this case and the defendant should be held liable and civil charges should be brought against Ashford Hospital. I want to thank you for taking the time to review my post, and once again, thank you.